Transition assessments are crucial for empowering students to learn about themselves so they can take an active role in their career development and post-secondary goal planning processes. This module on transition assessments will introduce you to transition assessments, help you to select, provide, utilize, and interpret age-appropriate transition assessments, understand the purpose and outcome results of ongoing transition assessments, and provide an opportunity to apply the skills from this module in a case study example. So what is transition assessment? Just as secondary transition planning is a component of the IEP process, it should not be considered an activity that only occurs annually prior to a student's IEP meeting. Ongoing and age-appropriate transition planning based on assessment results can assist teams in supporting students as they explore various educational and employment opportunities to help make informed decisions about career and adult living goals. Ongoing data collection helps identify a student's current interest and preferences and how those areas can lead to future educational or employment outcomes. The information gathered helps the student and the IEP team utilize strengths, interests, and preferences with making connections and recommendations for course selection, creation of measurable post-secondary goals and annual goals, and what the student may need to be successful through specially designed instruction based on their areas of need. Gathering this information provides the opportunity to engage multiple stakeholders as resources and providers of current and future post-school opportunities for students and their families. Transition teams can engage families in the assessment process and planning as early and as often as possible to support their student. What does age-appropriate mean? Age-appropriate assessments are student-centered and take into account the student's chronological age. The student's grade level or developmental age are not factors when looking at age-appropriate transition assessments. These assessments focus on the student's preferences, interests, needs, and strengths. Student input is gathered by utilizing multiple assessments, in addition to input from the student's family, educators, community members, and/or agencies who are working with the student. Assessments are not a one-and-done process. Transition assessments are an ongoing process. Transition planning and assessment does not stop once the annual IEP is completed. Prior to a student's annual IEP meeting should not be the only time a transition assessment is given. Ongoing transition planning and assessment should occur during the current IEP year to monitor the data being collected to determine if there is progress being made towards the student's post-school goals. It's important to use this data for planning meetings to determine if the student's preferences, interests, needs, and/or strengths have changed within the transition domains. Although an age-appropriate transition assessment may be given to the student, one assessment does not assess all three transition domain areas, meaning that additional assessments will need to be administered once the team determines which domain needs further evaluation. These domains and areas assessments are post-secondary education or training, employment, and independent living. Within each domain, there are various areas of assessment to help determine a student's strengths and areas of need, in addition to answering questions about a student's ability to achieve their goals and what the student may need to help and support their success towards the goals. The team may decide to utilize a district-created student interview or survey as one way of gathering data through a transition assessment. However, this assessment alone will not provide enough information to formulate the creation of measurable post-secondary goals. Based on this initial assessment given, the team can determine which domains are still in need of additional data gathering and administer additional age-appropriate assessments. As you can see from the slide, there are several areas to be addressed in each of the three transition domains. Each domain needs to be assessed and the data reviewed with the student to evaluate if the student's interests and preferences are in alignment with the data results. You may be thinking, how do I select appropriate assessments for my student? The Transition Coalition in 2008 produced a transition assessment planning form to help IEP teams to determine the areas of assessment to consider in each domain and ask guiding questions about: what do we already know about the student? What do we need to learn about the student? How will we gather this information? Who will gather the information? And when will the information be gathered? This planning form can be found on the PA Secondary Transition website for your review and consideration for your use. There are also multiple types of transition planning forms and documents that can be utilized by your school district teams. As you begin to explore various transition assessments, think about these guiding questions on selecting appropriate assessments. What is the assessment measuring or assessing? What interest? What preferences? Is it a skill demonstration? Where is the student presently? Does the assessment allow the student to discover different strengths, areas of need, and/or interests that they didn't realize previously? Or does it support and reinforce what the student already knows? Do the assessments align with the student's interests and preferences? This should lead to some self-discovery. Would the assessment provide you additional information needed for transition planning and instructional purposes? So, do we need additional information because our current data needs expanded, or is it in need of updating? Did the student's interest and preference change from one year to the next? What is the student currently doing to get them to where they want to go? What individual and team decisions could be made with your student using this type of assessment information? What courses should they be taking? Are the courses aligned to assessment results and student interest? What skills and experiences will the student need to successfully attain the post-secondary goals? What community-based experiences could be explored? What do they need to know to apply to college? Will they need a job coach to support them in the community? As you can see, more than one transition assessment will need to be administered to address a student's interests, preferences, strengths, and needs for the post-secondary training, employment, and independent living domains. Assessments administered to students on a teacher's caseload may not be the same, as the selection of transition assessments must take into consideration the individual student and what information the team is trying to gather. The entire 8th grade class may take a career interest inventory, as they are exploring options for what they want to do after high school. Reviewing the survey results with the student and administering additional assessments may help with the selection of courses or electives for when the student enters high school. The transition assessments chosen will change over time as the student moves through the high school years. Once the student has reached the career development phase of transition planning, assessments selected should reflect assessment of targeted skills needed to engage in specific selected employment options. For example, if a student is interested in working in the healthcare field, the team needs to identify what skills are related to healthcare, what skills the student currently possesses, and what skills will need to be built upon in order to attain the post-secondary goals. Gathering this information will help the IEP team to identify possible career options for the student in the healthcare field. Keeping these questions in mind, along with the information provided by the student, family, teachers, and/or other agency staff, the areas of assessment mentioned on the previous slide can be given to a student as informal or formal transition assessments based on what the IEP team is trying to determine. Informal assessment procedures are less structured and do not allow comparison with other students. However, because informal procedures allow assessment of student performance over time, they are useful in designing and evaluating the effects of instructional interventions. In addition, informal assessment includes data to be collected from a variety of individuals: parents, teachers, employers, job coaches, using a variety of non-standardized methods. Formal assessment typically involves using a standardized procedure for administering, scoring, and interpreting an assessment. By clearly defining how an assessment is administered, scored, and interpreted, this allows a student's score to be interpreted relative to other students or normed, although not all standardized assessments are norm referenced. Including both informal and formal transition assessments, which address all three domain areas, is important for gathering as much updated information about a student in order to guide the development of the most appropriate transition plan. Whatever type of transition assessment you use, remember that the results need to help make instructional programming decisions, provide information for present levels of performance related to a student's strengths, interests, preferences, and needs, learn about the student outside of academics and their career goals, develop of measurable post-secondary goals and measurable annual goals, select appropriate transition activities and services that enable the student to make progress in their skill development, and most importantly, help the student make a connection between their individual academic program and their post-school goals. Upon gathering all the assessment results, comparing the data, and meeting with the student to determine alignment of the student's interests and preferences with the results of the data, the IEP team should be able to answer these questions. Were the transition assessments utilized able to provide the most beneficial information about the student? Were they able to determine the student's strengths, areas of need, preferences, and interest? Are measurable post-secondary goals able to be written in the three domains? Are transition services identifiable? Is the student taking classes to support their interest? What agencies are needed to support next steps? Are the annual IEP goals aligned to the student's needs? Next, we are going to apply what we have learned with utilizing Allison's case study. This case study is available in the course materials section of this course. As you read Allison's case study, keep these questions in mind. What are the assessments given and what are they assessing? Would the assessment provide information needed for transition planning and instructional purposes? Identify those areas. What decisions can Allison and her IEP team make to help with the development of the measurable post-secondary goals for education, training, employment, and/or independent living? Please take some time to read the example case study about Allison. National Technical Assistance Center on Transition, or NTACT, has provided this sample case study for Allison, an 18-year-old high school junior who was identified as having a specific learning disability that affects reading comprehension and written expression. Thanks to varied transition assessments taking place, we know much more about Allison. Now that you have read Allison's case study, what types of transition assessments were provided and what information was gathered from the assessments? We find that several varied assessments have been given with their results from Allison's case study. Both types of assessment were included with formal and informal result assessment summaries. Note what decisions were made using each assessment. Allison completed the Career Employment Education Checklist, which indicated a preference for educational instruction and community and social service occupations, and noted strengths with her interpersonal skills. This also supports her current interest in working with young children, and she likes to work out at the gym with friends and play softball on a county league team. After high school, Allison is planning to go to a four-year university, not a community college, which she also indicated on the school's junior year survey. Her parent survey and interviewed also supported this educational path of a four-year university and not a community college. Information about Allison's struggles, meeting assignment deadlines, and needs to improve her organizational skills were mentioned in the teacher reports, parent interview, and student interview, in addition to Allison rating herself on the AIR self-determination assessment.
As you can see, each domain area has informal and formal assessments, but multiple assessments were needed in order to gather the information. When documenting the transition assessments within the IEP, the name of the assessment, the date in which the assessment was provided, and linking the assessment results back to the student's preferences, interests, strengths, and areas of need will help in the development of post-secondary measurable annual goals and annual goals, in addition to the development of the present levels of academic achievement and functional performance sections of the IEP, which will be addressed in upcoming modules. By ensuring that the ongoing and age-appropriate transition assessments are completed, interpreted, and applied, the IEP team ensures that a student's pathway towards post-secondary outcomes is individualized and appropriate for the student. IEP teams are supported and held accountable for ongoing and age-appropriate transition planning through compliance measures.
These areas of transition compliance are reviewed through the Indicator 13 checklist, Item 3, where the IEP must show evidence that the measurable post-secondary goals for education and/or training, employment, and independent living were based on age-appropriate transition assessments. In addition, when your school was going through the Compliance Monitoring Continuous Improvement, File Review Section 21A on Transition, Question 289, specifically looks for evidence that the measurable post-secondary goals were based on age-appropriate transition assessments. Within the IEP, transition assessments interpretation results should be easily located within Section 2 of the Present Ed levels and Section 3 of the Transition Services. Are there age-appropriate transition assessments included? Are the assessments current, listing the name of the transition assessment and the date the assessment was provided? Is this date within the current IEP year? Does the assessment connect back to the student's current interest? Does the information that was reported lead to the creation of measurable post-secondary goals for education and training, employment, and independent living? In addition to the IEP, another location that transition assessment should be located is within the reevaluation report. In the RR, Section 1, Summarize Information Reviewed, Question 4 asks for current classroom-based assessments and local and/or state assessments. In addition, transition assessments and interpretation of results should be included in Section 2, the determination of need for additional data, summary, and conclusions. Although transition planning is not required until the student would turn 14 within the most recent IEP, it is a best practice to identify the transition plan for assessment through the IEP process once the student becomes of transition age within the student's reevaluation report if they are not yet 14 years of age. This can be a listing of assessments, activities, courses, or other transition options that your district may have designed to help guide transition planning. There should not be blank sections or sections marked as not applicable with any section of the reevaluation report.
You learned that transition planning is ongoing throughout the IEP year and reviewed to ensure age-appropriate transition assessments were provided to identify a student's current interest, preferences, strengths, and areas of need through ongoing data collection. The information gathered helps the student and IEP team to utilize the data in making connections and recommendations for course selection, creation of measurable post-secondary goals and annual goals, and what the student may need to be successful through specially designed instruction based on their areas of need. Multiple formal and informal assessments should be provided and compared and discussed with the student based on their current interests, preferences, and goals. Gathering this information provides the opportunity to engage multiple stakeholders as resources and providers of current and future post-school opportunities for students and their families. Transition teams can engage families in the assessment process and planning as early and as often as possible to support their student.
Although there is not an established assessment process method that is used universally, the following resources may be helpful for your school's development of transition planning processes and procedures.
Will be to take some time to participate in the Coffee Talk discussion board to answer the following transition assessment related question. What is your process and or sequence of steps for developing a deep understanding of a student's interest, preferences, strengths, and needs in relation to their post-school goals, which will help to determine the types of informal and formal transition assessments? After the completion of the Coffee Talk questions, please complete the module quiz on transition assessments. As discussed in previous slides, ongoing age-appropriate transition assessment interpretation and results need to be addressed in various locations of the student's IEP.
In the next module, you will gain a better understanding of the key components of the present educational levels and how those components relate to transition age IEPs.